Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast. We cover everything Major League, from spring training to the World Series. We've got your favorite club covered, from New York to Boston to LA. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast.
Hello and welcome into another edition of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. Today is Monday, October 5th. Hopefully everybody had a great weekend out there. I'm currently enjoying a beautiful Sunday. I actually have the ability to record during the afternoon today because games are typically going on during Sundays, so I like to record late evening, closer to midnight, to try to get the latest results, whether it was the playoffs, the regular season. But this is the first Sunday since the year started, 70 days ago, that we haven't had any baseball today. So I'm actually able to sit down, look out the window here, beautiful sunshine, and talk to you guys about baseball for the next hour or so. So thanks for tuning in once again. I certainly appreciate it. We got a great show lined up for you today. We're going to get into my previews and predictions of the divisional round. I know if you guys have been listening every day to the podcast here, you've heard a couple of different outlooks and previews, so I'm not going to get into a ton of detail. We're going to leave that for segments 3 and 4 and just kind of discuss my thoughts on the overall bigger picture. But at the top of the show here, in the first segment, we're going to get into what was a sad day for Major League Baseball this past week, and unfortunately, the third time I'm having a conversation like this with you guys. You know, they say bad things come in threes, and here we are again discussing the passing of a baseball legend. And this time, unfortunately, you guys know by now, Bob Gibson died of pancreatic cancer this past week, and I want to do something similar that I did with the guys in the past here with Bob in the first segment. So diving into some of his background, some of his accolades, and everything that went into being Bob Gibson, without getting into a ton of detail about his background. His father died when he was very young, and he was named after his father. So he grew up with a mom who was working a couple of jobs to make ends meet. His oldest brother assumed the role of role model, father figure, however you want to describe it, early in his life. And his oldest brother attended Creighton University, which actually led Bob to attend Creighton University himself. And this is something I didn't know until earlier today, or the past couple of days, when I started doing, some research into Bob Gibson, his life, and kind of his career, because, of course, myself being 31 years old, I was nowhere close to seeing his actual career, so I wanted to watch some highlights and everything going on. But Bob went to Creighton himself, where he was actually on the basketball team as well as the baseball team. Now, this was groundbreaking in its own right, because he was the first African-American athlete in both sports at Creighton University. On the basketball program, the baseball team, obviously his brother was not an athlete, but Bob was a fantastic basketball player as well. He went to Creighton from 1954 to 1957. He had 3 seasons on the basketball team. He averaged 20.8 points per game his first year, 22 his second year, and 17.7 in his third year. So that's good for a career total of 20.2 points per game, as well as he has a career free throw percentage of just under 73%. So my guy obviously was a great athlete. Everybody knew that due to all the gold gloves that he won on the diamond later during his Cardinals career. But during his time in college, averaging 20 points on the hardwood, a fantastic basketball player in his own right. And because he was that good at basketball, even after signing with the St. Louis Cardinals or during negotiations to sign with the St. Louis Cardinals, he actually played a year for the Harlem Globetrotters. And what? I had no idea that was the case, but he left after a year because he didn't like the nonsense or non-serious side of basketball, and this gets back to his reputation as being very stern, intense, mean, angry, almost rude sometimes to people due to his persona on the mound. And I mean, this just aligns with everything in his career, and he walked away, as well as the additional money from the St. Louis Cardinals that they offered him, apparently to get him to hang up the basketball shoes for the rest of his career. But Bob Gibson, a fantastic basketball player, along with being a heck of a pitcher. And, now let's discuss some of this baseball career and some of the accolades he was able to attribute over the years. And obviously a Hall of Famer. He won an MVP award during what was his best season in, let's see here, let me get the year right. It was 1968. And this year, we're going to talk about a lot because this was the year of the pitcher, quote unquote. Bob Gibson went 22-9 with a 1.12 ERA, which is the lowest ERA in the history of Major League Baseball over the course of a regular season. And this one wasn't over 60 games. This one was over 34 starts in 304 innings. So 304 innings, he gave up 38 earned runs. He gave up 11 home runs. Now, it doesn't show me how many of those were 3-run, 2-run solo shots, but 11 home runs contributed to the 38 total runs, only giving up 198 hits in the course of the 304 innings. He also struck out 268 in that season while only walking 62. So a fantastic year. He won the Cy Young. That was the first Cy Young of his career, and that was obviously noteworthy because he became the second African-American in the history of Major League Baseball to win the Cy Young Award, the first one being Don Newcomb, and Bob being the second one here in 1968. But the reason this year is such a big year is because it led to a rule change, the Bob Gibson rule. Now, it's not it labeled that in the rule book, so to speak, but everybody knows that this rule was put in place because of how dominant Bob Gibson was during this 1968 season. And that rule was that they lowered the pitching mound from 15 inches down to 10 inches to where it is today to give hitters a better chance to hit guys like Bob Gibson, who were just at 15 inches up there, just pounding the bottom of the zone and really not giving these hitters a chance. So Major League Baseball literally implemented a rule because of how good Bob Gibson was at the sport. And I can't think of any off the top of my head across other sports. You guys out there listening, please write in the comment section wherever you're listening to this, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, whatever. If you can think of a rule that was specifically implemented because a player did something the previous year. Now, I'm not talking coaching staff like Bill Belichick manipulating the last 5 minutes of the fourth quarter using the false start rule that we saw be implemented this past offseason. I'm talking about actual player being so good at something that they have to implement a rule to change to give the others a chance. I'd be fascinated to hear if there are any others out there who have done this. But 1968, Cy Young, MVP, Gold Glove Award. That was his only MVP. He went on to win 2 Cy Young awards in his career. His other Cy Young came in 1970 at the age of 34. He went 23-7. Those 23 wins were a career high. He had a 3.12 ERA in 294 innings, 274 strikeouts that year. So you lowered the mound from 1968 to 1969. Bob Gibson then went on the next 2 years to go a combined 43-20 with an ERA under 3, right around actually 2.6, if I'm doing the math here quickly, over the course of, let's say, 600 innings. So, yeah, you can basically take your lowered mound and put it where. It was the reaction that Bob Gibson had. And, again, back to his personality, that would certainly align with the things that he would say or he would communicate. And we'll get into a little bit of that. I do want to continue down some of his statistics and accolades, two-time World Series champ, two-time World Series MVP. And looking at these stats, his postseason statistics, now they don't have all of the postseason stats, just the World Series here on Baseball Reference. But in 1964, he was the World Series MVP when they defeated the New York Yankees in 7 games. Now he started 3 games in that series, went 2-1 with a 3.00 ERA over 27 innings, of course, because you never took Bob Gibson out of a ball game. Literally in the World Series, he started a combined 9 games and went 9 innings in every one of those games. So he was never removed for a bullpen pitcher, never removed for a pinch hitter in a situation. And we're going to get to some of the hitting statistics, but this actually reminds me of a tweet I saw a few days ago, and I took a picture of it, that one of the best Bob Gibson stats is that he threw 28 complete games in 34 starts in 1968. Okay, so this gets back to the year, once again, where he absolutely dominated. In those 6 games, he was removed for a pinch hitter. So Bob Gibson went an entire season. Think about that, 162 games. How many starts do we got here? 34. Without being removed for another pitcher. Seriously, I just pause. An entire season. They didn't go to the bullpen saying, I think this guy has a better chance of getting this hitter out than you do in this situation. That's how good he was in that year. But back to his postseason, like I said, never coming out of the game. He was the MVP in 64. Well, he backed that up with an even better performance in the 1967 World Series, where the Cardinals defeated the Red Sox in 7 games. He went 3-0 in that series, winning games 1, 4, and 7. He gave up a total of 3 runs in 27 innings for an ERA of 1.00, 26 strikeouts in 27 innings. And, oh, by the way, offensively in that World Series as well, he went yard in Game 7. Yes, it was his only hit of the World Series, but he went downtown in Game 7 to put the cap on the World Series MVP for the second time in, 4 years. So just a fascinating run from Bob Gibson. He averaged 19 wins over the course of 1963 to 1972. So for a decade there, averaged just shy of 20 wins per year, which again would be outstanding in today's ball games. But those guys throwing almost 300 innings, just a fascinating difference in game that ultimately being played from here and now to then and there. So he was the second pitcher, to reach 3,000 strikeouts at the time of which he completed the feat. So that was obviously a huge honor at the time of completion for Bob. Let's see here, he threw a no-hitter in 1971. So even though he went a year with a 1.12 ERA, he had been in the big leagues for 11 years at this point. All-Star 4 or 5 times. He hadn't thrown a no-hitter until 1971 against the Pittsburgh Pirates in what was one of his best starts of his career. Also, Game 7, as I'm rolling through my notes here, I missed this touching on it. Game 7, the complete game he threw to win the World Series, hit a home run. He did that on 2 days rest. So the guy's complaining now, going on 4 days rest, 3 days rest. Well, Bob Gibson on 2 days rest, complete game, Game 7 MVP, also hit a home run. Just a fascinating conversation. But in the 1968 World Series, he struck out 17 in Game 1. They ultimately lost this World Series. He had a 1.67 ERA in 3 starts, went 2-1 against the Tigers. And obviously, Game 1, striking out 17, led to the total of 35 over the course of 3 games. But just a amazing career. Basketball at Creighton, Harlem Globetrotters, the St. Louis Cardinals for the entirety of his 17 years, 251 wins, an ERA of 2.91. Like we talked about, the strikeouts, he had over 3,100 in the course of his career. And some of his quotes, he was quoted as saying, "Half the plate is mine. It's your job to figure out which half." And people were quoted as saying he wouldn't care if his grandma was in the box. If she was trying to crowd the plate, he'd go up and in and let you know. There's people quoted as telling rookies, hey, don't look him in the eye, and don't look him in the eye. If you hit a home run, don't run around the bases too slow. Don't run around the bases too fast because you could upset him. And he hated when people came to the mound for a visit, whether it was his catcher, the pitching coach, first baseman, second baseman. He didn't even look at you, give you the time of day. He apparently worked very fast, which as a player playing behind him, which would be, oh my God, that would be the best combination ever. A guy who hates mound visits, doesn't like me talking to him, but also works fast, pounds the zone, strikes people out. Oh my God, we're going to get out of here in 2.5 hours. It's going to be fantastic. So Vin Scully described how fast Bob Gibson used to work as it was as if his car was double parked outside the stadium. So he would catch the ball and go, catch the ball and go. He pitched with anger. He pitched with intensity. And ultimately, it's what drove him to be one of the most successful pitchers in the history of baseball. And if you talk to some people, they would say possibly the best to ever do it. I know he was ranked, I believe it was 31st on baseball's list of best players in the history of baseball that they did around the turn of the century. And, the more research I did, the more that certainly came to light. So rest in peace, Bob Gibson, of course, passing away this week once again after a battle with pancreatic cancer. It's unfortunate here, 2020 strikes again and takes its third Hall of Famer in the past month and a half. But, man, just another tough day for baseball. But Bob Gibson, just outstanding what he did for the game and what he did throughout the course of his life. So that'll wrap it up here for the first segment. We'll pause now for a word from one of our sponsors, one of our sister shows. But when we come back, we're going to talk about some job openings across baseball. Angels GM, Phillies GM, some managerial openings. We're going to talk about who may be involved and ultimately if I think they're good jobs or not. So stick around, everybody. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. We'll be right back.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I appreciate you guys listening in today here on Monday, October 5th. Hopefully you're enjoying your weekend out there. A lot of great football going on right now as I'm recording. 1 o'clock games coming at you fast and furious. Hopefully everybody out there is off to a good fantasy football start. I know there's some people listening here from 0-3 to 3-0. I myself, 2-1. First place in my league, most points scored. Should have a good week thus far, but it's too early to tell at this point here on Sunday afternoon. But it wraps up perfectly again because my birds, the Philadelphia Eagles, they're on Sunday Night Football. The Walking Wounded coming in hot to San Francisco out there by GS where you guys are listening. Oh, my God, I think they're going to get crushed. But this is the Baseball Podcast, so we'll stick to that conversation. If you want to hear more football conversation or fantasy football conversation, check out those podcasts, though. Type them into wherever you're listening, your search bar, GSMC Football. You'll get a couple of different options. There's some great content in there if you're looking for a couple of waiver wire editions, how to get out of the hole. Check it out. It's quality content for you guys. But here in the second segment of the Baseball Podcast, I do want to talk to you guys about the job openings across Major League Baseball. We had an announcement this weekend, Saturday afternoon. The Philadelphia Phillies GM Matt Klentak will be stepping down, quote unquote. And for those of you who aren't aware of what's going on in Philadelphia, there's obviously some turmoil happening because a payroll of close to $200 million missed the postseason for the fifth straight year, but the GM was extended before this past season for a reason nobody really knows. It happened kind of in quiet, in passing. Hey, you signed Bryce Harper, so I guess you get an extension, even after last year, which wasn't a great year. So nobody really got that. And this is why he is stepping down, because basically owner, VP, they didn't want to fire him and have to pay him to do nothing. So they're going to tell him to go to the other side of the building, probably get in a closet, maybe make sure the water cooler's full, or if you want to do the fair and foul lines during the game, or, make sure the guys have the food afterwards. You can do all that stuff, but we're still going to pay you, and we don't want you to do nothing and sit at home, so you still got to come to work. And it's frustrating, certainly here as a Phillies fan, due to the press conference that took place, and ultimately the actions and the words aren't aligning, and that can, as a fan base, which is very educated, certainly ruffle some feathers. But I wanted to dive into, because this GM role is now the second open position for general manager across Major League Baseball. The LA Angels, they dismissed Billy Epler probably about a week ago because, rule of thumb within Major League Baseball is that you don't make huge decisions or announcements during playoff baseball. So this is why the Angels let go of Epler prior to the postseason happening, immediately after the regular season. The Phillies wanted to take a couple of days and talk about things, then waiting for in-between rounds to announce that, they're going to move on from Clentac here. So 2 openings, 2 different coasts, 2 teams which are similar in the way that the opening was created. Very high payrolls, very high market, high money cities, no problem here like there is in Oakland or Tampa when it comes to the monetary situation, but also disappointing teams year after year that haven't made the postseason. So high expectation teams with certainly some pitfalls and some things that need to be improved upon. This discussion I want to have here today is which job is a better job? If you were offered both of these opportunities, which one would you take out there? And on a surface level, let's kind of start out with roster construction, looking at the contracts for next season. Right now, of course, the big 2 fish that are out in LA are Mike Trout and Anthony Rendon. They are signed for the next 5 years plus. In regards to Mike Trout, his goes on forever. Albert Pujols' contract you have for 1 more season in 2021. Then you can finally get out from under that, and potentially there could be an agreement there. But I do think Pujols wants to play and will ultimately be back on the roster next year. Justin Upton has 2 years, a little bit over $50 million remaining on his deal. So after 2 years, you can kind of get out of that. But Andrelton Simmons doesn't look to be coming back next year. Julio Teheran doesn't look to be coming back next year. Bundy, Haney, these guys all get into arbitration. And without going too far down the rabbit hole and using Baseball Reference to look at some dollars committed, and for guaranteed contracts, they have $118.2 million committed, and rough estimated value of arbitration costs looks at just over $50 million, so a payroll of $176.4 for 2021 for the LA Angels. And now the luxury tax is at about $210 million. Of course, nobody really knows. Is that going to increase, decrease? The pandemic, owners losing money. There's a very detailed conversation that is yet to be had here. So again, using rough round numbers, let's go with the Angels at $175 in payroll, luxury tax at $210, which gives you about $35 million in free agency to improve upon this team. And the problem is, within the starting pitching world, that a top-end starter could net $20, $25, $30 million a year. So you're going to have to be very economic when it comes to who you distribute your funds to and how to utilize the value. Because if you're going to go big fish, 15, 20 million a year, you can really only do 2 of those and then a bunch of veteran minimum style of guys. Or you could look at the road of, 7, 10, 12 million, getting about 4 individuals who could potentially help you. So is there more value in getting 2 number 2 or number 3 starters, kind of middle tier guys, 10 to 12 million a year, Lance Lynn prior to this past year type of deals that have been signed? So you add 2 to your rotation, you still have I don't know, $11 million to add to the rest of the ball club. You utilize that in a couple of different ways, maybe one larger fish, two smaller guys, depending on your depth. Shohei Ohtani coming back from an injury, wants to continue to go both ways. So a lot of questions out in L.A., but you do have Mike Trout, you do have Anthony Rendon, and those are certainly two offensive pillars that you can build around moving forward. Now, your minor league ranking is 21st for the Angels after the completion of the 2020 season. Of course, this becomes an even greater crapshoot when you look at moving forward, because a lot of these guys didn't have a minor league season this year, so you're going based on what you think development would look like. Have the younger guys physically developed as much as you want them to moving forward? A lot of unknowns. And being 21st out of 30-some-odd teams is certainly lower third, so you're not putting a lot of weight into that making a difference in the near future, which gets back to your actions carrying a ton of weight in free agency. On the other side, we got the Philadelphia Phillies, who are in a similar situation where they spent a ton of money over the past handful of years and really haven't had any rewards being brought back to them. So on that side, your pillars, you have Bryce Harper on the offensive side. Honestly, that's probably the only one I'm willing to put there because JT Realmuto is a free agent still as of this offseason, and that would be responsibility number one of who this new general manager is what are you going to do with JT? Is another team going to throw an astronomical amount of money at him that you ultimately just cannot match because it wouldn't be good business? But at the same time, are you going to let JT walk, who you gave up Sixto Sanchez for, and you just watch him pumping 100 miles an hour in a playoff game, going toe-to-toe with Yu Darvish in 5 scoreless innings? This is what the fan base is screaming at the television every time we're watching it. So that's a very tough decision to make within your first couple of weeks. The Angels, they don't have decisions like that to be had here immediately, so that is a tough one from the Phillies' perspective. But the benefit for the Phillies is you have Zach Wheeler and Aaron Nola locked up for at least 3 more seasons. And these two guys at the top of the rotation are much better than anything the Angels have on that roster. So the pitching side of things, or at least the rotation side, looks better because you also have Spencer Howard as a prospect that you're high on. Zach Eflin has performed well as a number 4. So the rotation is in greater shape. The offense, yes, it's older. It's going to need to be rebuilt because Andrew McCutchen has 1 more year with a team option after that. I don't believe they would pick up. Gene Segura has 2 more years with an option. I don't believe they would pick that one up. Jay Bruce will be a free agent. Didi Gregorius is currently a free agent. So the offense is going to look completely different next year. And shortly after that, as the veterans start to, their contracts start to expire, and I believe the Phillies will look to get younger. But the problem is, their minor league ranking is actually 23rd. So their minor league system is much more bare than that of the Angels. Now, you're saying much more, Kev. I mean, 23 to 21. Well, when you look at some of the prospects and the top-end talent for the Angels, that top-end talent for the Phillies is already here. And we've seen Alec Baum. He graduated to the bigs. He's going to be an everyday player next year, which I am perfectly fine with. Spencer Howard graduated, so a lot of top-end talent. Connor Brogdon looked good out of the bullpen, but the depth there isn't where I believe it needs to be, and certainly that lower-level, high-end talent is very, very thin for the Phillies minor league system. When it comes to their payroll, once again, 2021, the dollars committed are $114 million. If you look at all arbitration eligible, that's coming in around $31 million. So the payroll without picking up options of Jake Arrieta and other individuals, Tyler Robertson, they're looking at $153 million being committed moving forward. And with a salary cap, quote unquote, a luxury tax, once again here in Philly, you can't say those words in baseball, but that's pretty much what ownership is looking at it. That leaves $55 million to make some moves this offseason. Now, once again, that may be bringing back your own guys. Are you giving $25 million to JT and then $15 million to Didi Gregorius, and now you have $15 million to improve a bullpen, which had historically the worst ERA in the history of baseball? Is that what you're giving me? Because that's one guy. That's one top-end arm, and you need much more depth than that. So are you letting JT walk and using that 25 for two high-end bullpen arms? How are you utilizing this money, this $40 million that you were giving Arrieta, JT, David Phelps, let's see here, David Robertson? So the funds are going to have to be distributed somewhere. It's just going to be fascinating to see ultimately which direction the new GM will go, because there are two different paths there that they could go down. But looking at some candidates here, I've seen the names of Dave Dombrowski, former Red Sox president, be involved in both GM searches. Now here are more on the Angels side. These next three guys I've seen talked about: Josh Burns, who is the senior vice president of baseball operations out for the Dodgers, staying on the West Coast right there in L.A. Dodgers, obviously a great team, so don't hate that name being thrown around. Dijon Watson, assistant general manager in Washington. His name's been discussed, of course, due to the success of the Nationals. And then Logan White, who is an assistant advisor to the general manager in San Diego. And San Diego obviously making some nice moves with their roster construction here over the past summer and past couple of years, looking to be a dominant force over the next couple of years moving forward. And in Philadelphia, we've heard Dave Dombrowski, Eric Neander, vice president of baseball operations for the Rays, is the home run named hire that's being discussed around these parts. Basically, we're saying give this guy a blank check, give him all the responsibility he wants, but we need him here now, and we need him here yesterday, so get him into town. You also have Billy Owens, assistant general manager for the Oakland Athletics, being talked about, and then Tim Nehring, vice president of baseball operations for the New York Yankees. And this is where I look at it as a Phillies fan, that the Phillies can only hire somebody from these teams. I mean, this is really all I'm looking at. I'm looking at potentially the Yankees, absolutely the Tampa Bay Rays. As you look at the NL East, I'm staying out of there. NL Central, I'd be okay with somebody from the Indians. They're an excellently run organization. You're looking at the Cardinals out west, the Athletics, and then you got the Padres, the Dodgers. I mean, you're looking at those teams that are being run extremely well in lower market cities. I mean, Tampa Bay, Oakland, these guys, not big payrolls, still advancing in the postseason. Imagine what those baseball operations guys could do with the money and the market of the likes of LA or Philadelphia, with both teams having huge television contracts, huge abilities to pay people. It's just a matter of managing those assets and utilizing them well, because both of these teams and both of these fans are certainly extremely frustrated with what's happened here over the past couple of years. But which job would you take? I guess my final answer here, wrapping this up, it would have to be the Philadelphia Phillies. I know I'm a Phillies fan. I know I'm a homer. Honestly, looking at Los Angeles, the location, L.A., Philly, whew, baby, it's tough to argue against L.A. and heading out west. And huge market, huge city, you're kind of the second fiddle there. Not a lot of people care, potentially. You're outside of downtown L.A. You got Mike Trout, you got Anthony Rendon, you got money to spend over the course of the next couple of years. But that pitching staff and that high-end rotation potential in Philadelphia, along with the likes of Bryce Harper, Rhys Hoskins, and the like offensively, Alec Bohm, I think the future is brighter in Philly. And based on what I've heard around the industry, Philadelphia does seem to be an attractive destination, a desired destination, and I haven't heard the likes of those types of words being used when communicating around the Angels opening. So it'll be fascinating to see who gets either position. I myself, if they offered them to me, I'd take the Phillies gig, but I want to hear from you. So let me know out there in the comments which opening you think is more appealing and which job you would take if you had the chance. But that'll wrap it up here for the second segment of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. When we get back, I'll finally dive into my previews, my predictions. We're going to start off in the National League. Stick around, everybody. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. We'll be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back, and thanks again for listening to today's episode of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik, and it is officially time to break down the Divisional Series. We talked about Bob Gibson passing away, unfortunately, at the top of the show, then got into the general manager openings that are currently available across Major League Baseball, but now it is the moment you guys have been waiting for. We are talking about the East versus the East, the West versus the West, as the Central Divisions decided this year was going to end after the wild card round. And we'll start out in the National League. First of all, it is fascinating how the Brewers got eliminated, the Cardinals got eliminated, and the Cubbies all got eliminated in the National League. And then in the American League, White Sox, Twins, and Indians. So 6 teams in the Central. Thanks for coming. See you later. We're going to stay on the East Coast and the West Coast moving forward here in Major League Baseball. And let's talk about the National League first, since the American League has a bit more of the feistiness to these matchups based on what happened in the regular season. And the Marlins-Braves is the first matchup in the National League. Now, of course, these teams played each other 10 times during the regular season. The Braves won 6 of those matchups, going 6-4, including winning 3 of 4 over the course of the final week of the regular season to clinch the divisional crown. So the Braves have to feel good going into this series, knowing they took 6 of 4, even though the pitching staff isn't where they want it to be. But how did we get here? First and foremost, of course, the Braves, they defeated the Cincinnati Reds while not giving up a run in that series, 2-0. And then the Marlins, who were 300-1 to win the World Series when the year started, find themselves defeating the Cubbies 2-0 with Alcantara and Sanchez having fantastic starts. So these two teams know each other, like I said, when it comes to potential game changers on both sides. Of course, the keys for the Braves are going to be Max Fried and Ian Anderson. Fried tossed 7 scoreless innings against the Reds. Anderson followed with 6 scoreless innings. They both had fantastic regular seasons, so that just carried over right into the postseason starts. And it'll be a matter of whether they continue this against a Marlins offense, which has shown a bit more promise of late. Now, they did rely on the big inning against the Cubbies, ultimately in Game 1, having a 5 spot, and I believe it was the 7th inning, but ultimately they score in bunches, and it'll be up to the Braves' rotation beyond Fried and Anderson to see how they perform in this series. And that'll put a lot of weight on Kyle Wright, who will most likely go in Game 3 in this series. He's a young kid as well, and, the Braves' bullpen has been excellent. So outside of Anderson and Fried going to Wright, it may be bullpen from them on. In Game 4, I have Toussaint potentially as a starter because he was used over the course of the regular season, but ultimately that could be a bullpen style of game. And in Game 5, I don't have anybody written down. I think Max Fried would ultimately come back on 3 games rest if they had to go to a deciding Game 5. But the offensive side of things from Atlanta, their offense was one of the best offenses in Major League Baseball this summer. Now, that was helped out by a 29-run game against these Marlins earlier this year. So the Braves do have that in their back pocket as well. Hey, yeah, we won 6 of 10, but we also scored 29 runs in one game against these guys. So they finished just behind the Dodgers with runs per game at 5.8. Of course, Freeman, Ozuna, Acuna, Travis d'Arnaud, Albies, Duvall, Dansby Swanson, all of these guys, had effective regular seasons. Now, that didn't equate to offense in Game 1 of the postseason, with it being 0-0 into the 13th inning and the Braves winning 1-0. They did perform a bit better in Game 2, but certainly some concern has to be drawn if you're a Braves fan with this offense. And honestly, that's due to the strikeouts. I mean, Trevor Bauer and Luis Castillo, they carved them up in the wild card round. And they did this in the regular season, too. The Braves were 21st in strikeout rate, because that's even more fascinating when you list Freddie Freeman and Ozuna being some of the best at strikeout rate. That shows you where the rest of the team is in regards to kind of, their mentality up there and putting balls in play. So Bauer and Castillo had a ton of strikeouts. Could Alcantara and Sanchez do the same thing to this Braves offense? And will their reliance on the long ball be good enough to be able to perform against that Marlins staff? And lastly, for the Braves, of course, you have that good bullpen. Finished fourth in the majors with a 3.40 ERA. Will Smith was the only guy who really struggled out there. Mark Melancon, Tyler Matzik, Grant Dayton, all of these guys had great regular seasons. And this is where, if we get into a bullpen matchup, because you're going to Games 4 and Games 5, I think it's going to be advantage Atlanta Braves. But from the Marlins side of things, of course, they're going to try to follow kind of what the Reds pitching matchups, what they did, how they attacked these Braves hitters. Because for 13 innings, or I guess 12 and a third in Game 1, they held them scoreless, and certainly were not blown out in Game 2. But Alcantara was fantastic against the Cubbies. Sixto Sanchez threw 5 scoreless against the Cubs. So those two will line up, of course, against Fried and Anderson in Games 1 and 2. Then you have the likes of Pablo Lopez coming after them in Game 3. So the depth on the Marlins side is a bit better, and certainly the stuff is just as good, or, I guess slightly worse, because Bauer's going to win the Cy Young, and Alcantara and Sanchez aren't really to that point. So it's certainly going to be just a notch below, but very, very good when it comes to the pitching side of things. So can Lopez throw in the changeup that he does, be effective in Game 3 after the hard-throwing Alcantara and Sanchez? It'll be fascinating to see. But the Marlins rotation has to feel pretty good about where it aligns going into this series. Offensively, of course, they're going to try to get things going. They're a bit more aggressive and less dependent on home runs than the Reds' offense is, so they should put the ball in play more, put a little bit more pressure on Atlanta's defense in regards to ultimately how they attack. They against soft and breaking stuff during the year, the Marlins kind of let that stuff go. If you look at the advanced metrics, they, let's see here, ranked 10th in batting average and third in batting average and balls in play against off-season or off-speed pitches. So it was fascinating to see that, they kind of sit on that fastball, but when they get off speed, they don't utilize it much. But when they do, they're able to get a hold of it. And, lastly, from the Marlins side of things, you're looking at Starlin Marte. He took a pitch off the hand against the Cubbies, ended up missing Game 2 in that series. Will he be available for this Braves series? And if he is available, ultimately, how effective can he be swinging the bat? Or is he going to be a defensive replacement, a pinch runner? Nobody's really sure ultimately how that hand is going to heal. But I know there's some things that they can give guys to deal with pain, and I presume Starling Marte is going to be one of these individuals. But he was the key addition at the trade deadline for the Marlins, so they're going to want him to be added to the offense. But overall, looking at this series, I talked to you guys that the Marlins could be tough on the Cubbies because that offense in Chicago may not align to that pitching. But ultimately, the Braves, their lineup being much deeper offensively, being much more potent over the course of 3, 4, 5 games, I think it will find its footing and get rolling here. So I'm going Braves in 4. I think they split games 1 and 2, win game 3, and then ultimately game 4 in what becomes a battle of the bullpen. That Braves bullpen versus the Marlins offense, I'm going to give the advantage to over that Marlins bullpen against the Braves offense. The other series happening in the National League has a bit more animosity to it, a little bit more hatred between the two clubs, and that is obviously the LA Dodgers versus the San Diego Padres. Dodgers went 6-4 against San Diego this year, outscoring the Padres 48-36 over the course of those 10 games. And this one gets interesting because on September 14th, Trent Grisham, he slugged a home run that spoiled a Clayton Kershaw nice outing, but Grisham gave a look, a bat flip, an animated trot, and several Dodgers players were not pleased with ultimately what took place there. But that's the Padres' MO this year. I mean, we talked on it, the Tatis thing during the regular season. There was more conversation about them during the postseason and Tatis's antics after long balls. Machado, Will Adams. I mean, a lot of these guys are Will Myers. Excuse me. It's going to be fascinating to see ultimately kind of where that line is in this series because you had Ozuna taking selfies, Tatis and all these guys celebrating much more than usual. But honestly, I don't have a problem with it. I love the energy. I love the passion. And I think we're going to see a lot of that over the course of the 5 games. But the Dodgers coming in, they swept the Milwaukee Brewers. Ultimately, a team that was under 500 really didn't deserve to be in the playoffs, so the Dodgers didn't have any trouble ultimately working through them. They went Buehler and Kershaw in games 1 and 2. You would presume that will be the same here, followed by May, Gonsolin, and Urias after them. It was, really no trouble for them to kind of get to this point, and this is the first time that they're going to be tested here in the postseason. Now, the Padres, they lost game 1 against the Cardinals, bounced back in a crazy game 2 before ultimately finishing them off in game 3, but the issue for the Padres is the pitching, and nobody really knows about the health of Dinelson Lamet or Mike Clevinger. Are they going to be able to perform in this series? Are they even going to be on the roster? And they're going to need these guys more than ever if they're going to try to make a run against this Dodgers team and this loaded offensive lineup that just continues to come after you guy after guy after guy, because Chris Paddock and Zach Davies both went, I think it was 2 innings in the first round, maybe 2 1/3 from Paddock, and they're not going to be able to repeat that performance and advance against the LA Dodgers because over the course of 5 games with no days off, you're not going to be able to strut out your bullpen like that time after time. So you're going to need Paddock and Davies to match up against Buehler and Kershaw, or you're going to be in a lot of hurt early on here because the bullpen, it's solid in San Diego. I mean, it threw a complete game shutout in a decisive Game 3 wild card game. So it was fascinating to see none of these guys, I think, throw more than 2 innings in that matchup and ultimately have the success they did. I mean, Pajan in the 7th, Pomeranz in the 8th, Rosenthal in the 9th, Garrett Richards out there, Strahm, Johnson. There's a lot of people in the Padres bullpen that can be used effectively. Now, on the Dodgers side of things, they're pretty loaded there as well. I mean, you got Gratterall out there, Kenley Jansen. Which one's the closer? Who knows, depending on the situation. Dylan Florio could be back on the roster. Trian, Kelly, Baez, Gonzalez. I mean, these people are loaded out there in the LA bullpen, so it'll be tough to see San Diego having any advantage on that side of things. But when the attitude gets going, the animosity starts happening, how does this line up? So the Padres, they come in hot too. I mean, Fernando Tatis Jr., he had a slump there in September, but in the wild card round, he was 5 for 11, 2 home runs, a double, 3 walks, which is a fantastic 3-game stretch. Jake Cronenworth was also very good at second base, the rookie. He was 5 for 8, 2 walks, a triple, and a homer. I mean, that's excellent stuff up the middle. The Dodgers, Mookie Betts comes in with 3 doubles and 3 RBIs in 2 games against the Brewers. Corey Seager hit a home run. Chris Taylor went 3 for 6. But Josh Turner and Max Muncy on the other side struggled a little bit here. So it'll be fascinating to see ultimately, and a lot hinges on the health of Dinelson Lamet and Mike Clevinger, and ultimately how this series pans out. Because looking at it on paper, Walker Buehler versus Chris Paddack should be a solid matchup, but Chris Paddock's outing in the wild card round does not instill confidence in me or anybody moving forward that he's going to be able to bounce back and perform at an extremely high level. So I would think advantage Dodgers in game one. Then you got Clayton Kershaw versus Zach Davies. Zach Davies, once again, didn't perform well in the wild card round, but there's also playoff Kershaw. And early in the playoffs, Kershaw typically performs well. It's when you get to that second and third round series going up against actual World Series caliber teams that he starts to struggle. And the Machado from the right side, the Tatis from the right side. Now, I know you got, a couple of lefties in there, Myers from the right side. I think they could get to Kershaw in game two if Davies gives them a push, but I really don't think Davies is going to be able to hold down that Dodgers offense. So it could be another 11-9 outing in game two, going either way. But then you get to Dustin May, Urias going up against Lamet and Clevinger, and if those two were 100% healthy, this would be a different conversation. But with their elbow issues, and even if they are able to throw, it's going to be 1-2 innings tops. I don't think that the Padres are going to have the depth to be able to have the success against the Padres that they did against the Dodgers that they did against the Cardinals. Excuse me there, mixing up my teams. But ultimately, I'm going Dodgers in 4. I do think San Diego's offense will be able to steal a game during the first 3, but it would not surprise me if the Dodgers run through this in 3 games and continue to sweep out opponent after opponent. But that'll do it here in the National League. It's really not interesting. I do want to see the Marlins make a run just because they're the Cinderella. Marlins-Padres, NLCS would be fascinating conversation, but I'm going with Old Faithful. I'm going with Old Boring, and that is going to be a Braves-Dodgers NLCS coming up here next week. So when we talk to you guys this Thursday, we'll have a bit of an update on this series. We'll be able to break everything down. But for now, we're going to pause one last time here for a word from one of our sponsors, one of our sister shows. But when we come back, we're getting into the American League, and this is going to be fantastic. Rays, Yankees, Astros, A's, a lot of hate happening in the American League. So stick around, everybody. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. We'll be right back.
Want to know the latest in soccer? Then listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast. From MLS, the World Cup, and the Premier League, we've got you covered. The latest updates, the hottest matches, and news on the league's top players. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast.
David Beckham scores the goal to take England all the way to the World Cup finals.
Listen now.
Hello and welcome back. Thanks for listening to today's episode of the GSMC Baseball Podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. We've had a great show for you thus far. Unfortunately, we had to talk about the passing of another legend at the top of the show. Bob Gibson passed away this week as 2020 strikes again, taking its third Baseball Hall of Famer here in a matter of, 4, 5, 6 weeks. So we talked about Gibson and all his accolades he was able to accumulate during his career, the differences he was able to make. We then talked about the Angels and Phillies general manager openings, who's going to get those jobs, which one would you want? And then lastly, we talked about the NL Divisional Series. So now we're going to wrap things up this final segment talking about the American League Divisional Series. Once again, East versus East, West versus West, as the Indians, Twins, and White Sox all decided we're going to see you guys next summer. And it was nice to have a taste of the playoffs, but ultimately we're going to bow out with the White Sox being the only team to actually win a game in the postseason. So let's start out with the Rays and the Yankees. Let's go to the American League East. Let's get right into it, because the last time these two teams saw each other, the benches cleared, multiple people were suspended, including Aroldis Chapman and Aaron Boone, for Chapman throwing 100 miles an hour over the head of Mike Brousseau. And this was, the last punch, so to speak, that took place over the course of this summer, where the Yankees didn't like something Tampa did, Tampa didn't like something the Yankees did, and then ultimately Chapman threw 101 or 100 right over the head, and both benches cleared, a little bit of a scuffle, bit of a brawl. In 2020, masks on, it was kind of crazy to see all of that stuff, but it's clear there is no love lost between these two teams, and a lot of that frustration coming out of New York and Chapman is because Tampa was 8-2 this year against the Yankees. Honestly, they handled them pretty good. I think they won, 3 of 4, swept the 3 games, and then won 2 of 3 for that 8-2 record. So it was certainly impressive what Tampa was able to do head-to-head against New York. Now, New York did have a lot of problems with injuries over the course of the regular season, so some of these games did not come with the Yankees at full strength, and that is the team that will, walk into this weekend. So it's a team that the Rays haven't seen, but also a team that the Rays feel like they own mentally here since this summer has equated to what it has. But both of these teams advancing, of course, the Rays making quick work of the Blue Jays, and then the Yankees, an impressive offensive performance that they put up against the Indians and that pitching staff, because the offense scored 22 runs in 2 games, of course, using quite a bit of long ball home run power to just dismantle Shane Bieber. And, man, that was just an impressive offensive showing in round 1 for those things. But let's see. Let's kind of match up the games here, looking at 1 through 5. Ultimately, at the top, you'll see the first same starters, I should say. It's going to be Blake Snell versus Garrett Cole in Game 1, and Garrett Cole was very impressive in the first game of that wild card round. He was the better pitcher between him and Shane Bieber, and ultimately he looked like the pitcher more so of 2018 than the 2019 version of Garrett Cole. He was up close to 100, working that top 2 quadrants, as well as, lower with the breaking ball, high with the fastball. It was impressive to see him back in action again. Blake Snell had a fantastic year this year as well. So both offenses will be challenged at times to score runs in this series, even though the Yankees offense has been extremely impressive thus far. But they go into spurts. So that Yankees offense, yes, they did average 5.25 runs per game, but it was way less when they played the Reds. The Yankees totaled 3.4 runs against the Rays, and that's where this Rays pitching staff has been able to hold down, this Yankees offense throughout the regular season. And going back and looking at some of those box scores, it was impressive what they were able to do. But heading back into potential Game 2 starters, you're looking at Tyler Glasnow versus Tanaka from the Yankees side of things. And, Tanaka was good, not great in the postseason. Glasnow was better than average, I would say, against the Blue Jays. So those two matchups certainly aren't surprises from any side of things. But going on from there, looking at the depths of these rotations, you're looking at Yarborough for the Rays in Game 3 going against J.A. Happ. There was communication that Happ would have started Game 3 in the wild card round if they needed it. Ultimately, they did not, winning Game 2. But J.A. Happ, he's been around. He's thrown in multiple postseasons, won a World Series all the way back in 2008 with the Phillies, 14 games of playoff experience. So moment shouldn't be too big for J.A. Happ in this situation when it comes to Game 3 of the championship series. In Game 4, you're looking at Charlie Morton versus Jordan Montgomery from New York side of things, and Montgomery has been hit or miss this year from what I, have been watching. Now, his statistics really evened out, but there were some starts where he was fantastic, and others where he couldn't seem to find the zone and was hit around. So, depending on which Montgomery shows up, could lead to a blowout in Game 4 or a toss-up, because Charlie Morton and his playoff experience dating back to the Astros, now in Tampa Bay, the moment is certainly not going to be too big for him, and he should be impressive once again in his postseason start. In Game 5, if we're getting there, I would be very surprised if Cole did not go again for the Yankees on short rest, as well as Blake Snell. Honestly, you would have Fleming and Paxton kind of hanging around there as potential options for these two clubs, but ultimately I think you would see the Game 1 guys be run back out there. So what do I see happening here? Like I said, I like Tyler Glasnow, Blake Snell, Yarborough, and Morton from their side of things, but I like this Yankees offense much more than the Rays offense. So it's kind of strength on strength when it comes to Rays pitching versus Yankees offense, and then Yankees pitching beyond Garrett Cole against that Tampa offense, which, really doesn't have one guy that stands out as, hey, we can't let this guy beat us, or he has Aaron Judge, Giancarlo Stanton type of power. It's death by 1,000 paper cuts where it's good at bat after good at bat, and then you look up late in the game and your starting pitcher has a high pitch count and ultimately is out of there in the 5th and 6th. Then you get to that bullpen and utilize some guys in certain situations who maybe aren't, normally utilized there, and the leverage or the moment gets to them and they make a mistake, and Tampa just seems to take advantage of every possible mistake. So which way am I leaning? I think I'm going Tampa in 5. Tampa was 8-2 in 10 games during the regular season, but once again, the Yankees not being at full strength for those games does make a difference. This offense scoring 22 runs against that rotation in Cleveland has certainly made me do a double take and kind of look at the screen a couple of times to make sure there's no smidges and I'm seeing things correctly. So I was impressed with that offense. If they stay hot, get to Snell, get to Glasnow, certainly the Yankees could be a World Series favorite, but I just think that pitching staff is going to hold them back this October, and I think Tampa over the course of 5 games proves out that they're the better and ultimately deeper baseball team, because with no days off, I think that really does make a difference. And the last series to discuss with you guys here today, of course, is the Houston Astros versus the Oakland Athletics. The baseball villains, the Darth Vaders of the world here within baseball. The Houston Astros stay alive as they beat the Minnesota Twins 2-0 in Minnesota, which certainly had to be the surprise of round 1 with Minnesota's success at home. Houston's lack of success on the road, that was just overwhelmed by Minnesota's lack of playoff success. And Houston, just put the pressure on, and Minnesota crumbled down the stretch in both of those games. But let's see. The A's, they dictated the season series in this one. They won 7 of 10 games. They outscored the Astros 38-25 in those games during the regular season. So that's an impressive feat for sure on their side of things. But a lot of animosity between these two teams because, of course, with Houston's background, 2019, banging trash cans, wearing buzzers. Well, this all started because of Oakland starting pitcher Mike Fiers, who is a former Astros pitcher, kind of being the whistleblower. So now Mike Fiers will be facing his old team, and his old team would certainly be charged to stick it to Mike Fiers and ultimately for putting them through what they have now gone through. But again, no love lost between these two teams. There was also the instance earlier this summer where I believe it was, I can't remember the guy's name and I don't have it written down in front of me here. But ultimately, let's see here. Oh, this is it. Ramon Laureano. There it is. Ramon Laureano charged the Astros dugout after being hit by a pitch for the 3rd time in an incident which also triggered suspensions. So Yankees-Rays had an incident, people were suspended. A's-Astros have had an incident where people were suspended. So Carlos Correa adding fuel to the fire, talking about how I know a lot of people are mad. They don't want to see us here, but what are they going to say now? End quote. Now that we're in the 2nd round, and a lot of people out there, CC Sabathia had some choice words for Correa and things along those lines on different podcasts that were fascinating. But ultimately, the Astros 31-31 overall after going 2-1 in the playoff or 2-0 in the playoffs. Injuries hurt them this year, but they're feeling good going into this 2nd round. And the Athletics, they won their first postseason series in upwards of almost 15 years. So they got to be feeling good. A hard 3-game series against the White Sox really tested them here in the playoffs. So they're set for anything that could happen here moving forward. But keys for the Astros, of course, starting rotation depth. You're looking at Greinke, Valdez, Urquidy, McCullers Jr., and Christian Javier in some sort of rotation for 5 games. Now, in the first round, we saw him utilize 2 starters for each game. Does he do that here in round 2, or does he get back to the older model of letting the starters go 6-7 innings and then get into the bullpen? It'll be a wait and see ultimately on how Greinke, Valdez, and those guys perform early on. Can the offense in Houston get things going? Of course, Jose Altuve, George Springer, Alex Bregman, Carlos Correa, all huge names, but have all struggled this year, whether it's, the pandemic in 2020 or the fact that they don't know what's coming. I'm not going to go down that hole, but either way, it's been an issue for them this year offensively. And then the bullpen. How's the bullpen going to hold up? A lot of injuries happening down there. You do have Josh James. You got Ryan Presley down there closing ball games out. He got his first postseason save in Game 2 of the Wild Card Series round. He's been a bit up and down this year, dealing with some tenderness, but he'll be ready to go. He'll be fine for the playoffs. And ultimately, it's a pitching side of things for Houston. Can they get to Oakland, and can they hold down that offense enough for their offense to come around and make a difference? Because for the A's, you're looking to just hang in there through the starting rotation. You got a back-end bullpen that you very much trust on your own side of things, knowing how Houston's bullpen's in flux. So if you could get beyond those starters, get into that bullpen early, you have to feel good about yourself. And honestly, the hitters, they're very disciplined on Oakland's side of things. It's kind of fascinating because they hit .295 on pitches in the zone. So they have a good effect on pitches when they actually attack the right ones offensively out there in Oakland. But at the same side of things, there isn't really a guy who jumps out as a difference maker from that offense. So, this staff and this position player group, ultimately, I guess is the word I'm looking for, leaves a little bit to be desired, especially for myself. Now, in the playoffs, again, they hit 194 in 3 games. I know the top performer here, let's see, in 3 starts, you had Sean Murphy hitting 375, Chad Pinder, but then you get down to La Stella, Simeon, Davis, Loreno, Kahn, Grossman, Olsen, didn't get a hit in 3 games. These guys struggled to really make a difference, and I thought that they were very fortunate that they got beyond that White Sox team, and that bullpen game in Game 3, shutting out the White Sox, was very, very impressive. So, ultimately, my pick in this one, I'm going to go A's in 4. I'm not sure why. I think it should be 5, but I'm going A's in 4. I think this Houston team, they've had themselves a long summer. They've been up against it. They've been pretty worn out with everything going on. If Zach Greinke, though, is able to go out there and have a vintage Greinke Game 1 and make a difference, and he's able to save Valdez or Javier or whoever they were going to utilize after him for Games 3, 4, and 5, that could swing the series. And honestly, if Houston's offense shows up, it could be Astros in 4. I just haven't seen it. They didn't show up in Minnesota. They didn't show up during the regular season. But we all know how good Jose Altuve is, Springer, Correa, all of these guys. And if they get hot here for a couple of days, they could find themselves in a fantastic series and win this one. But I'm going to go with Rays in 5, A's in 4, and we're looking at a Tampa-Oakland American League Championship Series. So let me know what you guys think in the comments. Let me know who you think's going to advance, who we're going to see. Is it going to be Braves, Dodgers, and Rays versus A's like I'm predicting here today? If you think it's somebody else, get in the comments and let me know. But that'll do it for today's episode here. Another fantastic episode of the GSMC Baseball Podcast here on Monday, October 5th. I do appreciate you guys listening. If you've made it this far and somehow you're still listening to this podcast, share it with one of your friends, share it with one of your family members. Help us continue to grow, continue to spread the word, as I love to do what I'm doing here, and that's talk baseball with you guys. So enjoy the week out there, everybody. I'll talk to you guys again. I'll be recording late Wednesday night for release on Thursday. We'll be able to break down, kind of a halfway point here for the series, and then next Sunday, get into those championship series and see how I did. But that'll do it for today. That'll do it for this weekend. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik, as always. I appreciate each and every one of you guys listening out there. I love you. Enjoy the week. We'll talk to you soon.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast. part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.